Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Bookers and Books. There is an event going on in September that is rather popular and I'm very happy about it because I'm one of the hosts. It is Framed in September, where you are invited to read books about art. So it can be any type of art. It can be painting, can be sculpture, it can be music, dance, crafts, anything that is artistic in nature. And there's a type of video that has started to come up, and it's a video where the booktuber shows us their books about art. So I very much enjoyed these videos and I decided to make one myself. However, I'm not going to show you my books about books with beautiful pictures of paintings and other works of art. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my books about classical music. Some of them, not all of them. I'm going to spare you the more technical ones, like a book about music theory. I'm not going to show you that. I'm not going to show you sheet music. I'm not going to show you books about how to play the flute. Just books, general books about classical music. Some of them are on more specific topics. So the way I'll present them, I'll start with the books in English and then I'll finish with the books in French because some of them I think are worth being presented. And also, if you go to my older videos, you will probably see above my head that I used to have my music books just right there. So perhaps you're curious about what they were. So in this video, I'm going to show you what they are, even the ones that are in French. So I'm going to start with the ones in English, the more general ones, so the one that present the topic of classical music a bit more broadly, and then I'll go into the more specific books at the end. So that's the order in which I'm going to present the books, and I have a few of them, so I'm going to start talking. So the first book I want to present is this one. It's probably the most introductory level, I guess, kind of book. So this is How to Listen to Great Music, A Guide to Its History, Culture and Heart by Robert Greenberg, and it is part of the Great Courses. So this is very much structured for somebody who wants to learn about classical music. It starts chronologically with the origins of classical music in the West, then moves into medieval music, and then into Renaissance music, Baroque music, and through the different eras like this. We are presented with the composers, we are presented with the various music forms. So if you don't know what's the difference between a symphony and a concerto and things like that, this is going to explain it all to you. So this is a very good introduction. If you studied music at some music conservatory or something, this is going to be rather useless. But if you're just interested in general in classical music and don't know exactly where to start, this could be an excellent overview. Then again, another book that is another excellent overview, but that is going about it in a bit of a different way. This is the Essential Canon of Classical Music by David Dubal. So in this book, the author goes composer by composer. They are presented in chronological order. So the first one, it starts with medieval, Renaissance, and Elizabethan ages. So the first composer mentioned is Guillaume de Machaut, followed by Guillaume Dufay, Josquin des Prés, and then Thomas Tallis, that you perhaps know a bit more, and then Palestrina. And anyway, I'm not going to name them all because then we move on to Baroque composers, classic composers, romantics, and then including a whole bunch of modern composers. So these are all 20th century composers. As you can guess from the length, so the last composers, they are Philip Glass and William Balcom. So as you can guess by the length of the table of contents, the composers don't get many pages. So they get as little as 1 page and at most 10 pages. I think Beethoven gets 10 pages, not even sure. So the way it works is that the author gives a very, very short biography of the composer, and then he talks about the main works of that composer and then suggests some recordings if you are interested in those. And given that today we can easily have access to these recordings, I don't know how to say that word, to these particular renderings of the music on tape or on digital format. It's easy to have access to them, either through YouTube, through Spotify, through Apple Music, through Naxos Music Library. Does that still exist? It's been a while since I've used that. So chances are you can easily have access to these wonderful recordings and these wonderful works. So that one I highly recommend. Whether you're a specialist or a newbie in classical music, it's very enjoyable. It's a very good read. Then the next one is The Indispensable Composers, a personal guide by Anthony Tomasini. Tomasini, the author, is the chief classical music critic for the New York Times. And this book is a bit of a mental exercise. It's not meant to be objective. So the other two books, they are meant to present an objective history of classical music in a way. But in this book, it is not meant to be objective. So the author decides to pick 16 composers that for him are the indispensable composers. It's a bit an exercise of the desert island. So if you can only listen to 16 composers for the rest of your life, or if you could only know 16 composers, who would they be? And he ends up with the biggest names anyway, because the biggest names like Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, they are the backbones of classical music. And if you get rid of them, you get rid of everything that is, well, not everything, but you get rid of a good chunk of classical music that is excellent and that can be listened to over and over and over and without us getting ever tired. So we get basically the 16 most important composers in classical music. And I remember about that book, the author's conundrum. What do you do with Schoenberg? Schoenberg was a minor composer in a sense because his music is rarely played. His music is not listened to much. It is rarely programmed. However, he changed classical music forever. He is the one who codified atonality. That means the beginning of modern music where they don't follow a particular tonality and they sort of reject the classical or what had been so far the traditional principles, I guess, of harmony and progressions and all of that. And that's when music becomes weird and most people stop listening. So what do you do with Schoenberg? So that's what I remember about this book more than anything else. I liked what he had to say about the other composers too, but this dilemma of what do you do with Schoenberg, I thought was particularly interesting. So that one was fun. Then another book by another music critic, however this time it's the music critic from the New Yorker, I believe. It is Alex Ross, and this is The Rest is Noise, by listening to the 20th century. So this book presents a history of 20th century music, classical music. So it doesn't include jazz, rock, pop, things like that. It's just classical music. And the reference to The Rest is Noise, it's its starting point. In the 19th century, Richard Wagner, a German composer, who composed operas. He composed the opera called Tristan und Isolde, so Tristan and Isolde. And in this piece of music, he starts. I talked about progressions a bit earlier. Normally, that I don't know how to explain that without being too technical. There are chord progressions, and naturally we somewhat can predict these progressions because some of them, when you string certain chords after one another, sometimes it feels complete and sometimes it feels incomplete. For example, the reason why you know that Happy Birthday, let's say the song Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birthday to You, Happy Birthday, Happy Birthday, Happy Birthday. You know the song is not finished. You know that there's something missing after that. So it's the same thing with much bigger works such as operas. It starts in a way, and then you expect a resolution of the phrase of the particular piece. But what Wagner did with that Tristan and Isolde is that the resolution sort of comes at the end of the opera, like 2 hours later. So putting the listener on tenterhooks because you keep expecting this resolution of this chord that's going to make everything just fine. And it never comes. It comes only at the end, this chord. So that was revolutionary. And that's when everyone, like this phrase was coined, and the rest is noise. Because after that, that was the summum of classical music in its ancient form. And then now that had been achieved for music to continue to be something else, it had to change. And then, in the opinion of many people, it started to become noise rather than music. It started to be less agreeable, more experimental, leading to Schoenberg, for example, and other kind of musics that we tend not to like. Well, I say we, that's the thing. A lot of people like it. Otherwise, nobody would have paid for it and the composers would have composed something else. So there was an appetite for that type of music. And in this book, Alex Ross explains these various movements in the 20th century. So micro movements, I guess. So some had 2 or 3 composers and some others are 5 or 6 composers, and it goes in different directions because of the Soviet Union and so the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, they had different cultural priorities, let's say, and depending on where the money came from for the performance, for the commissioning of the works, and anyway, so the music in the 20th century goes in a bunch of different directions, and Alex Ross is good at presenting what they are, presenting the specificity and making the entire thing very interesting. And also there's a website and with all the composers that he mentions and links to recordings that you can just click on as in the order that they are mentioned. So as you read the book, you make sure you have an iPad or a phone or something, and you can listen to the music as you read the book. It's really, really good. Next, in a very specific topic kind of book, this is the Cello Suite by Eric Siblin. I've talked about it before. I think it's the 3rd time I'm talking about this book in a month. So this book is written by a Canadian author. He is a presenter on the CBC radio, and he became interested in the piece in the Bach cello suites. And that's the book about his interest in these cello suites. So it's a bit of a triple aspect. There's a part of the book that is on the composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. There's a part of the book that is on the cellist that sort of brought back these suites to the world, which is Pablo Casals. And then there's a part about the author himself who decides to learn how to play the cello so that he can get to understand the suites better. So this is really, really fun, super fun. I highly recommend it. Okay. And then this other book, this is Conversations on Music. No, it's not true. Absolutely on Music's Conversations with Seiji Ozawa by Haruki Murakami. So that is the author that you all know from 1Q84 or other such books. We have a photograph on the back. And this is conversations between the author and the conductor, because Seiji Ozawa is a conductor. At some point, he was a conductor for the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, not that far from where I live in Ottawa. And this is conversations that they had, and it is presented in the form of conversations. That one I don't really recommend. I don't know, it left me rather cold. I cannot say that I learned a lot. The part, Seiji Ozawa had very interesting things to say about conducting, so that these were interesting. However, I did not feel the chemistry between between Murakami and Ozawa. It could very well be a question of cultural difference, because I believe that 2 Japanese men who have a lot of respect for one another, who had never met before, their relation, their interaction will be sort of constricted, I guess, with several layers of politeness and civility that is inherent to Japanese culture. And I suspect that this does not translate well in English, in more casual Western North American culture. So the conversation feels very stiff. Perhaps a reader in Japan might not have this impression at all. But for me, who's not particularly versed in Japanese culture, I just see a lot of stiffness, and yeah, it's not like it's super enlightening. So this is just for people who are absolutely passionate about it, or very curious, or who want all of the works of Haruki Murakami. But it's not the most awesome book I've ever read about classical music. And then another very specific book that used to be just right above my head. It is this big, massive biography of Beethoven by Jan Swafford. I made an entire video about it when I read it. I read it for March of the Mammoth like a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It is a very, very good biography. It is very detailed. It goes into the music, so there is music analysis of the various, not all of them, but of Beethoven's most important works. So you see his personal life, and then in parallel his musical life, and sometimes you see the interaction between both, so the evolution of Beethoven as a person, and then the evolution of Beethoven in his music as a composer. So it's very, very good. And I know that Swafford has written other biographies of other composers, and we'll try to get to them at some point. My last book in English that I want to present, I'm going to present it now because I've read it. Normally, I have other books about music that I haven't read. I'm not presenting them in this video because I don't know if they're good or not. But it used to be above my head for a little while, and I just want to present it. This is The Complete Conductor by Gunther Schuller. As I said, I haven't read the book. However, there's a little flag that shows that I have started the book. So I found this book at a used bookstore, so it was rather cheap, and I thought, oh, why not? And the summary on the flap promised something that I wanted to know about. It promises to point out bad recording, saying this recording is bad, this is full of mistakes, this one is terrible, and I'm going to give names. And I thought, oh, I want the names. I want to know what a bad recording is, because in the other book that I present, where the author Dubal recommends recordings, I'm not the type of person who compares recordings and who's trying to find all of the recordings of a particular piece and then decides this one's good, this one's not good. I don't know how to do that. I wouldn't know how to be a classical music critic. I have no idea how to do that. And I thought I could acquire a bit of knowledge by reading this book. However, I started to read the introduction, and then I realized that the author's notion of what is good or not good has nothing to do with the person who is listening to the music. His only reference point is the manuscript. That's it. Do you follow the manuscript? And he considers a mistake a conductor, let's say, who would have the orchestra, because this is for orchestral music, play a particular passage at mezzo forte when the manuscript clearly says mezzo piano. As somebody in the crowd, do I care? As long as there's, I don't know, let's say it started with forte and then it's a decrescendo of some sort. As long as there's a decrescendo, what do I care if it's at mezzo forte instead of mezzo piano? I don't care about these things. So his only argument to denounce bad recordings is fidelity to the paper, and it discouraged me because I don't care about the paper. I don't study the manuscript before I go to attend a concert. What do I care whether it is respected to the letter, to the utmost, that the crescendo doesn't start, I don't know, to make sure that the crescendo starts at bar 112 and not 113. I don't care. I found just that way of seeing classical music, it in a way it offends me. As somebody who can only be in the seat of the listener, who's not going to be a player in any way, I think it's ridiculous. It makes no sense. So I still have the book because who knows, maybe one day I'll be brave enough and just read the rest of it, because I'm curious. You know, a bad recording, what is it? Who's a bad conductor and all of that? I'd be curious. But yeah, I think it might already be too old in a way. I don't know how if that way of thinking is currently fashionable, I'm going to say, in music circles at the moment. So it dates from 1997. So it's going on 30 years old. Yeah, it might be a bit dépassé, as we say in French. Next, I'm going to move to the books in French, but before you go away, before you non-French speaker go away, I would like to have your opinion. Well, not your opinion, but your suggestions. So I have these two books in French. And I would like to know, is there anything equivalent in English? That would be a bit more modern. So this is a guide to symphonic music, and this one is about the same thing, but for piano music. And what it does, it's like program notes a little bit. It goes by a composer, and then it tells you a little bit about the work, and that's what it does. There's no mention of recordings or anything. It's just really program notes. So this is, I don't know, so this is a symphony in this tonality. It was created for the first time in this particular year. So we have the theme of this, and then the second theme of that. What is new about this piece is that it uses, I don't know, the oboe in a particular way or something like that. So it's just program notes. The thing is, it dates from 1986. It has been reprinted a lot, because mine is a reprint from relatively recently. Well, I've had this book for 10 years, so maybe it's not that new. Does it say when it was reprinted? No, I don't know what year it was printed, but it's from 1986. So some young composers in this book, or very old composers by now, if not dead composers. In this book, Philip Glass is a very young composer. 1986, that's before the fall of the Berlin Wall, so we're still under the Soviet Union. Shostakovich has been dead since not that long, so in that book, Shostakovich is just one of many 20th century composers, an important one, but still just one of many, when nowadays his legacy is rather established. Shostakovich is probably the most important 20th century composer. So it needs something. It needs to be updated, and as far as I know, it has not been updated, and I don't think there's any intention of updating it, because it costs a fortune to produce these books, and they cost a fortune to buy. They're like $50 or $60, so they're rather expensive for paperback books. So I was wondering, is there something equivalent in English that gives you just a few words? So let's say here, that's just a few words about the composer and then about their main pieces. That's it. So this one is rather unknown, Abel Decaux. So that's the other thing, because the books are from a French publishing house. The French composers perhaps get more room than they deserve. Well, It's very hard to tell, but they get more attention than they would get from a book published in the English world. Because some of these composers, it's written, oh, he gets programmed once in a while, and I was thinking, never seen that name before. So perhaps they get programmed in France, but they don't get programmed at all in Canada. So yeah, if you know any similar books in English, I'd be interested to know. And if you speak French, so this is from the Les Indispensables de la musique by Fayard. They have a lot of books on music, and they are great. They are really well done. And in the same collection, I have a history of Occidental music, of Western music. It's a big book. I don't read it in order. So my bookmark is in Vienna in the operetta. So chances are the last time I picked up that book, I was about to go to a concert that featured something from Vienna. So that's the way I use the book, is when I go to a concert, if there's a new composer, if it's a period that I don't know much about, I go back to the book and try to place the piece in the context and just read a little bit about the context. And then one of my favorite books about classical music, this one, I'm showing it in the hope that perhaps maybe one day somebody will see it on my video, somebody who works at a publishing house, and will buy the rights and will translate it in English, because it deserves to be translated. So this book is Au cœur de l'orchestre, so at the heart of the orchestra, or in the middle of the orchestra, and the cover is by Sempe, who is an artist in his own right, so admire the cover here. And the author is a music critic, so Christian Merlin, he's a music critic. Is it for Le Figaro? I think it is. Yeah, Figaro. So it's a national French newspaper. This book is really about the orchestra. So there's the first, divided in three parts. The first part is about how the orchestra works. Really the side that we never see as somebody who goes to the orchestra. How auditions are made, how musicians are chosen, how do they get their financing, how are musicians paid, I don't know, there's a bit of history in it. How were they created at the beginning? Because at the beginning, there's no orchestral music in the 16th century because, well, orchestras did not exist. So how did they start to exist, and what is their structure, and things like that. So that's the first part. The second part goes more to the music. It goes section by section. What do these instruments do? So you have the first violins, the second violins, and then what do the brass section? That's the one that I know least. So what's the role of the trombones, of the trumpets, of the bass, not the bass, the tuba, and the French horns, and all of that. So they go through. What's the type of music, the role that they play generally. In the score, not so much in the orchestra, but as in the music. And then there will be a few mentions of the works that highlights this particular section, and then a few names of orchestral musicians who were particularly good in these positions. And for example, that is where you learn that the person who plays the timpani is one of the only two orchestra members who get to audition with the entire orchestra. All the others, like the flute and the violins and the cellos, when you audition for an orchestra, you just play on your own. You play whatever the list of excerpts you have to play, but you're on your own. But the candidates to play the timpani, so that's this one here, the one that goes boom 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 boom. More complicated than that, but basically that type of sound. He gets an audition with the entire orchestra because he's sort of the backbone of it. And the other one is the concertmaster. In French, it's premier violon, so first violin, but the concertmaster gets also to audition with the entire orchestra. And then the third part is about the role of the conductor. And this is rather hefty book. It's like 600 pages. So you get almost 200 pages explaining what's the use of a conductor. That's the title of the chapter. À quoi sert un chef d'orchestre? How useful are they really? And then their relationship with the orchestra and all of that. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. So I really hope that this one is going to be translated in English. And then I'm finishing. So the very last book in this rather long video, it's the book that I haven't read completely. I'm reading it sort of in little bits once in a while. And it's because the author is famous. It's not because of the content of the book. The author is Claude Debussy, so the composer. He supplemented his revenues as a composer by writing critics of concerts, or writing opinion pieces about music in a magazine. I don't think it was a newspaper. I think it was a magazine. So I thought, oh my God, a composer's view on music, that's going to be fascinating. And it turns out that it's not. It turns out that it's not super fascinating because first things first, Debussy is an okay writer. So he's not a wonderful writer. He's an okay writer. Some columns fall rather flat. And also he talks about the musicians and the composers who were performing in Paris in early 20th century or late 19th century. And 99.9% of them have been completely forgotten. For one famous Niccolò Paganini, how many violinists have played and were famous in their time and have been completely forgotten? So this book is rather a succession of unknown names. And then when I don't know, for me, it's not particularly interesting to read a critic of a concert by a musician that I do not know, about a piece of music that I've never heard. Sometimes when there's a recording available, I try to find it, but sometimes there just isn't because the piece was played once. It was heard by Debussy and anyone else who was in the room at the time, and it was not necessarily played afterwards. so my bookmark, I don't know, it's in the middle a bit at random. So it's about Berlioz, so that Berlioz was on the program, and Mr. Günzburg. So who on earth is Mr. Günzburg? I have no idea. I think he was a conductor, or yeah, and then there's Monsieur Julien, so I don't know who Monsieur Julien is. And then what other names do we have in this? So again, Monsieur Günzburg. Okay, Gluck, Meyerbeer. Okay, at least these are names that I know. Günzburg. Okay, so he really has it against Mr. Günzburg. I don't know what, that's the other thing. There might have been personal tensions in there that we don't know about, or that I don't know about. Mr. Alvarez, Madame Calvé, Monsieur Renaud. So it's a whole bunch of names that I'm sure at the time it was thrilling for the people who were reading about it, sort of people well placed in society, or at least in the music circles, and that had perhaps influence and power. But 100 years later, it's just, so yeah, I'm showing it because it's fun to know that it exists, but it's not something that I actually recommend, because it's just, yeah, it's a bit out there. It's a bit too specific. So that's the last book I wanted to show you. As I said, I have other books, but they are either not read, so I don't know if I can recommend them or not, or they are just too specific, and yeah, they would have their place on a music channel and not on a book channel. So that's my collection of books about classical music. So thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video that will likely be about something artistic too. I have books that have pretty pictures in it, so I may show you that. In the meantime, I wish you happy reading, and I will see you, as I said, in the next video. À la prochaine.